Well, Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers will visit China later this month in the first trip by an Australian Treasurer in 7 years as the two countries navigate geopolitical tensions. Chalmers will meet with senior officials in Beijing, and no doubt the sensitive issue of China's slowing economic growth will be on the agenda. To discuss this and other emerging issues from the Indo-Pacific region, we're joined now by Asia expert Andrew Phelan. Andrew has spent a lifetime studying and working in the Asia region, including working in joint ventures in the consumer goods and US medical technology space. He's a keen observer and commentator on Chinese politics as well. Andrew, welcome to the program. The regional ice continues to thaw by the look of it. Why is he going and what's at stake?
Ni hao, Chris. G'day.
Ni hao.
I'm not very good. I'm not sure the regional ice is thawing. Certainly there's a narrative that says, that the relationship between Australia and China is thawing somewhat. But, you've got to take a step back and look at the global picture. And the Chinese, they have the traditional board game of Go, which is a strategy game, which is all about occupying different places on the board. And right now they've got all these troubles with the EU. In the US on Capitol Hill, they're calling it China Week because they're trying to get through all these bills that are effectively putting restrictions on different areas of trade with China. Georgia Tech just severed its ties with the University of Tianjin. The Global South is struggling to absorb this China shock too of cheap imports, and we're hearing complaints from Thailand, Indonesia, Chile, and so on. And then on a military level, the temperature's rising in the South China Sea. It's not subsiding. There's a record number of aircraft crossing the median line into Taiwan. There's a huge number of fake Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels in Philippines' exclusive economic zone, and a Chinese Navy ship, PLAN, People's Liberation Army Navy ship, was seen off the coast of Malaysia the other day. So, and the temperature's actually rising. And just on that point, there's a military exercise happening off Hawaii shortly, and the new head of Indo-PACOM, Admiral Paparo, has invited a Chinese general, and he's accepted that invitation, which I think is probably a good thing. But all the things happening before my eyes are not good. Back to gentleman Jim Chalmers' mission to Beijing. What's that all about? I wonder what the purpose of that visit is. We know that commodity demand has come off for iron ore and coal as the Chinese economy slows. We know that, once the airports and the railways and all that are built, they're not going to be built again, right? So iron ore goes into steel, which is going into things like electric vehicles and all sorts of other products. But there's a limit to how much they can buy, and prices are down. So he's going up there. I'm not sure what his agenda is or what he wants to take home or take away from that meeting. Probably just another excuse to come back and say, the economy is not doing so well because of global conditions, which is his go-to. It's always somebody else's fault.
Yep.
And it's also been announced in the Australian today that there's a parliamentary delegation that's due to go up there, I think at the end of the month or beginning of next month. And it'll be about a half a dozen parliamentarians, from both sides, a little bit WA-centric, being a big commodity exporter. I expect people like Sam Lim, the WA MP, Malaysian Chinese guy, to be in that delegation, and a few others. I think Keith Woolahan, the Liberal MP for Menzies, which is held by razor-thin margins, heavily ethnic Chinese electorate. He's now communicating on WeChat, and I think he's trying to send a message to the Chinese community that, the coalition and the Liberal Party, we're good for business and that sort of thing. Traditionally, Aussie Chinese have leaned towards Liberal rather than Labor. It's only been in recent times with the recent geopolitical situation that they've leaned more towards Labor. But that's been described as, I think in Parliament they call it the Australia-China Friendship Committee. It's not really about friendship. It's more about negotiation.
But we've still got some catching up to do, haven't we, Andrew? I think China's ban on our crayfish is still in place. There's still more to achieve.
Yeah, it is. Crays are an interesting one. If you're up in China, you'd see in Chinese they're called longsha, which is literally means dragon shrimp, right?
Mm.
And if you want to show off at dinner and you're entertaining, you want to get Australian lobsters, right? It's like the Rolex or the fancy cognac or whatever. You want to show off and have face. You have Australian lobsters, and you used to see them on the side of on the footpath outside Chinese restaurants in these styrofoam boxes, and they'd just been air freighted up from Australia, right? So they'd cost a fortune at dinner. And of course, Xi Jinping's been talking a lot about not showing excess levels of consumption, not showing off. Mm-hmm. So he's in no hurry to get Australian crays back on the dinner table or the banquet table in China, which obviously hurts our exporters. But there was a food expo in Shanghai that Austrade did a week or so ago, and our avocado, apple, a couple of other commodities, they're talking about opportunities to get them into China. Now, what I think will happen, looking through my crystal ball, is that the PRC side, the CCP side will say, hey, that's all very nice, but we want more access to direct investment in rare earths, critical minerals, and processing thereof, right? Now, Chalmers and the FIRB have said no to Yushao Minerals getting a bigger stake in Northern Minerals. At the present time, they have 8%. They had a guy from Yushao who wanted to be chair of the board. That got voted down, and he's told them to divest. They can't further invest in that. But they are deeply tied to rare earths, state-owned enterprise sector, and that's a very strategic area for China. They dominate rare earths and critical minerals like nickel, for example, and the downstream processing of those. And that's been a huge issue for Japan, Korea. And this morning there was a hearing in US Congress about how the US wants to have better access to rare earths and critical minerals and process them. So this, I think, Chris, will be a real acid test for Jim Chalmers, yep, whether he'll give sway, yep, or whether he'll hold the line. He should hold the line because China has, they're an OPEC of one. They have a global monopoly on this, and these minerals are used in all sorts of high-tech products, particularly in defence.
Okay, away from the Australian-China relationship, what can you tell us about China's increasing influence in Africa? And is the US trying to thwart their work there on that continent as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. They just had FOCAC last week, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Trivia question for you, Chris. How many countries on the African continent?
Oh, come on. Talk about question without notice. 18.
I'm putting you on the spot. 54. Right? 53 of them, 51 of them sent their head of state to Beijing for this meeting. 2 of them sent sort of deputies. And only one country on the African continent, Itsy Bitsy Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, is the only country in Africa to have diplomatic ties with Taiwan.
Right.
So all the African heads of government, and China has a very big footprint in Egypt, very close in Egypt, Ethiopia, a bunch of other countries. They all sent their heads of state over there in delegations, and they're looking at signing trade deals and all that sort of stuff. There was an article in the Diplomat calling it the kind of grip of the octopus, China being the octopus and so on. If you look at what China's done in Pakistan, Pakistan is one of the most populous countries in the world. I think 250 or 70 million or something like that. But their Belt and Road work in Pakistan is called CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And it goes through Pakistan to the Arabian Sea, where they have the port of Gwadar, which is owned by the Chinese government. And they've had an insurrection from the local ethnic group against them. They don't see themselves getting any benefits. So all these sort of spot fires emerge where they have these projects. And in Africa, they want access to oil to minerals and things like that. But increasingly, because Africa, particularly the West Coast, doesn't really have great infrastructure in terms of defence and airports, the Chinese see that as an opportunity to move in. So the US has offered a package to Gabon in the Atlantic coast of Africa so that they avoid setting up a military base with China. And China's also announced, as part of Xi Jinping's what he calls the Global Security Initiative, this program to go and train police from 51 countries or something to go to China and learn how to be a good cop. What they're really teaching them is methods of control, how to stay in power, how to repress the citizenry, keep democracy at bay, all these sorts of things. And we've seen similar in our neck of the woods in the Solomons with that security arrangement. And so Australia's come in and said, hey, here's $400 million. We're going to bring you into the Pacific family and do policing training together, cut China off at the chase. That's what the Americans have done in Gabon. So it's on for young and old, the great game. And further to that, the countries in Africa that historically had a more Marxist, kind of leaning towards Russia in the post-colonial period, I'm talking about Tanzania, for example, or Tanzania, China set up a sort of equivalent of a party school to train government people in their way of thinking. And whether it's Tanzania or Zimbabwe, where they're very close linked there, in Zimbabwe's case, they almost have to get China's say on whether to do a coup or not. And because Africa is so corrupt, if you think Southeast Asia is corrupt, they're the world champs when it comes to corruption. There's a great case at the moment of the son of the president in Equatorial Guinea, who's got this super yacht that's nearly 100 meters long, meters, not feet, that's crashed into a yacht in Turkey. And one of his other yachts was confiscated by the South African government. As a reprisal, they arrested 2 South African oil mining technicians, threw them in jail on trumped-up drug charges. So for China, it's going into Africa, it's like taking candy from a baby, right? You bribe the corner office and off you go. But they're going to run into issues, and that relationship is very important because Africa's more than 1 billion people, and historically, it fell very much under Western influence. If you think in the height of the British Empire, from Cairo to Cape Town. And now China and Russia, especially China, are influencing there. And it's throwing down a big challenge to the US as to how to for security and influence.
I bet. I've only got a short amount of time left. The US State Department has issued an unprecedented warning to US businesses about Beijing's control in Hong Kong. How fragile is Hong Kong for foreign business entities, Andrew?
Well, I think from a legal point of view, from a commercial point of view, with the national security law, Hong Kong's increasingly being seen as an adjunct of the mainland. And, it's been discovered that a lot of transshipments, money transfers and all that have been facilitated through Hong Kong, to avoid sanctions on Iran and these sorts of things. So what the US government's saying, and it's kind of, the last time I was in Hong Kong, I had lunch with a mate at the newly refurbished American Club in Central. They have one on the other side of the island as well, and it's absolutely beautiful. But I think most American expats would be thinking of heading home, and a lot of corporations would really start challenging their reason to be there. And Singapore's been a great beneficiary of this. And just on that point, China's been using a strategy to backdoor the fact that the West is getting much more wary of China Inc. So they're using Singapore, Dublin, Hungary and Mexico to try and backdoor registering companies in those jurisdictions and trying to, hey, we're a Singapore company now. We're not mainland China, we're Singapore. So we're going in, TikTok's done this sort of thing. Some of the big e-retailers, Shein has done this, and they're trying to list in some of these other markets. And I think, the US and others will be saying, hang on a minute, that's a wolf in sheep's clothing there, going by these different jurisdictions, and they'll be aware of that.